Okay, let's start. I won't give a long introduction to Al. There are not many individuals out there who are affiliated with Informs and would have won Nobel Award. There are maybe just a handful out there. Now, I think everybody knows what that award is. Just to have Al as a speaker for this kickoff webinar series is truly an honor. And not only that it's good for our Health Application Society, but it also reflects so strongly on Al in terms of his graciousness to actually take out the time to do it. Not many people at that stage and at that stature in the career would even be reachable. So I still remember many years ago, I had invited Al to actually be part of a workshop. And I reached out to Al through some joint acquaintance. And I was so pleasantly surprised when he actually flew down from Stanford just for that half-an-hour event. It was just jaw-dropping for me because, you know, as I would say, you know, those who are truly blessed, and this is the word I'm going to use, you know, as the tree ripens with the fruit, they actually become more and more humble and more reachable. And I know healthcare, as we do healthcare, a lot of it is also about not just doing science, but also making a difference in a patient's life. So that said, I won't take much of additional time. The format is that Al will be speaking for the next 40 to 45 minutes or so. I've already chewed up 2 or 3 minutes. And then through chat, you could be asking questions, and we'll give the floor to Al to see if he can answer those questions in the remaining time we have. So with that, Al, the floor is yours.
Very good.
And thanks again.
Thank you. Let me try to share my screen. Is that successful? Do you see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Wonderful. So thank you for inviting me to address this health applications group. I'm going to talk to you about a health application, about kidney exchange. And given that it's an informed society, it's especially appropriate that I'm going to draw from a survey paper that my colleague Itai Ashlagi and I have coming out in management science. And the story I want to tell you is about both the history and the future of kidney exchange. And that's going to involve scientific and medical advances and organizational innovations, and a lot of politics and persuasion in getting new procedures implemented and adopted. So there are a lot of parts to this talk, and I'll try to touch on each of those things. The big headline about kidney transplantation is that there's a shortage of available organs. Lots of people need kidney transplants. Kidney failure is one of the top 10 causes of death almost all over the world. And in wealthy countries, we have available lots of ability to do transplants, limited by the number of organs that are available, of transplantable organs. So this morning in the United States, there's somewhat more than 90,000 people on the waiting list for a deceased donor transplant. It's hard to die in a way that allows your organs to be transplanted. You have to die in a hospital on a ventilator. And so in 2019, which is the last year I have really good data for, we were somewhat disrupted by COVID in 2020. 2019, there were fewer than 17,000 deceased donor transplants. I say fewer than because 17,000 is a big number, but there are 100,000 people waiting, more or less. So the wait is long and dangerous, and thousands of people die while waiting or become too sick to transplant and leave the waiting list for that reason. So one avenue to talk about is how we could increase the availability of deceased donor organs. But kidneys are special because healthy people have two kidneys and can remain healthy with one. So there's also quite a few living donors, and we got almost 7,000 transplants of living donors in the United States in 2019. And what that means is there are almost as many living donors as there are deceased donors, because living donors give one kidney and deceased donors give two. So there are many fewer living donor transplants so far, but not so many fewer living donors. And of course, there are very many potential living donors. So I want to tell you about the process by which we're chipping away at that. And to get ahead of myself, let me tell you that I'm going to tell you, for the body of my talk, I'm going to tell you about victory after victory, but it's in a war that we're losing, right? When I started working on kidney transplantation, there were about 40,000 people on the waiting list for deceased donors. And today there are, again, 90 something. And that's not all bad news. It means we can keep people alive longer while they're suffering from kidney failure. It means there are fewer deceased donations made by automobile accident victims, as highways have gotten safer and cars have gotten safer. So it's a mix of news, but it certainly, you shouldn't, as I go on telling you about victory after victory, you shouldn't think we're winning. Okay, so there's a long history of transplantation that starts in 1954. That's the first successful organ transplant of any sort, and it was a living donor transplant of kidneys between identical twins in Boston. And the surgeon, Dr. Murray, won the 1990 Nobel Prize in medicine for that and his related work. But for a long time, the World Health Organization felt that the preferable source of kidneys should be from dead people. And it would allow living donors, but they should be genetically related. And partly that was a technical concern about organ rejection. If you get a kidney from your brother, it has some genes in common with yours. But partly it was real reluctance to subject healthy people to a surgery that wasn't good for their health. But by 2001, while the majority of kidneys were from relatives, there were starting to be living unrelated donors. That is, the technology had evolved so that you could take a kidney from your spouse, for example, who doesn't have a genetic relationship to you, but loves you and wants to save your life. And we were just starting to see the idea that some people might be willing to donate a kidney out of pure altruism and not care who they donated to. And that was considered to be an ethical issue, that maybe we shouldn't be taking advantage of these people. So that's something that, as you'll see, has changed a great deal. And we get great benefit from altruistic donors today. Okay, so, but there's a technical, if you like, a medical, a biological complication for living donor transplantation, which is, first, you have to be healthy enough to give someone a kidney. You have to be pretty healthy yourself to be able to spare one of your kidneys. But you might be healthy enough to give someone a kidney, but you can't give the kidney to the person you love and whose life you would like to save, because kidneys have to be compatible with the recipient, right? There's a lot of things that have to match, and I'll tell you about some of them before someone can take your kidney. And so here's but kidney exchange started up, and the first kidney exchange in the US happened in the year 2000 in New England. And I was teaching at Harvard at the time, and got to read about it and start to think about how to better organize it. So what's the idea of a kidney exchange? Well, here's donor one who loves recipient one and would like to give her a kidney, but they can't easily because they have incompatible blood types. And here's donor two who would like to give recipient two a kidney and also can't for the same reason. But what you can see in the picture is we need a blood type B kidney and a blood type A kidney. And between these two incompatible patient donor pairs, we have the kidneys we need. So if the donor from one pair can give to the recipient of the other pair, we'll get two transplants, living donor transplants, that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to get. That is, what would have happened before kidney exchange started to be thought about in America what would have happened here is that donor one would be sent home. He'd be told, your kidney is not compatible with your patient. She has to remain on the waiting list for a deceased donor, the long, dangerous wait. And similarly for recipient two. But instead of having that long, dangerous wait for a deceased donor kidney, if we can arrange this exchange, we can get 2 transplants right away. And time is of the essence when your kidneys are failing, even though dialysis can keep you alive. But one thing you might ask, and in a different audience I would spend much more time on this, is why can't we just buy kidneys from people who are willing to sell them? And the answer is that's illegal just about everywhere in the world. Here's a little snippet from the American law, which says it's unlawful to receive or otherwise transfer any human organ for valuable consideration for transplantation. So there are laws like that everywhere in the world, with the significant exception of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has a legal monetary market for kidneys. So one question we had to deal with was kidney exchange legal in the US, or is giving a kidney valuable consideration? You know, there's something valuable being exchanged here. The question is it a violation of the law? And the Department of Justice declined to write a memo saying that this wasn't what the law intended to ban. And so eventually, once kidney exchange was already starting to become well established, Congress amended the law in what became known as the Norwood Act that said the preceding sentence, that sentence about valuable consideration, does not apply with respect to human organ paired donation. And paired donation is a term of art that avoids use of the word exchange. So the idea is that we require that kidneys donations be a gift, and this is a paired gift, but it's not valuable consideration under the meaning of the National Organ Transplant Act. And, you know, for you Americans in the audience, let me just mention that, you know, back then in 2007, the Norwood Act passed without any dissenting votes. It had big bipartisan support. You know, everyone voted yes, 100%, all the Democrats and all the Republicans. So you know, that used to happen, and maybe it'll happen again sometime. But what it means is that the American Congress doesn't object to kidney exchange. In fact, they support it. Republicans and Democrats both. Okay, so let me take you back now with some technical discussion. So long before kidney exchange, and what turned out to be some of the mathematics that inspired some of our work on how to organize kidney exchange. Long before kidney exchange, in 1974, in fact, in volume 1, number 1 of the Journal of Mathematical Economics, so a journal devoted to abstract mathematical models, Shapley and Scarf had a paper in which they talked about how you could exchange indivisible goods that couldn't be paid for with money. And they spoke of those goods as houses. So they said each agent has a house and has preferences over the houses, but you might like my house, or I might like your house, or I might like someone else's house better than my own house. How would we organize efficient exchange if we couldn't use money? Okay, and David Gale, they reported in their paper, proposed a very simple algorithm for finding efficient exchanges of houses when you couldn't use money. And the algorithm was the following. He said, pick someone at random, pick someone arbitrary, and say to them, point to the house you like best, the house and its owner. And then they would say to the person you had just pointed to, point to the one you like best. And eventually a cycle would have to form, because there's only a finite number of houses, and eventually some house has to be pointed to twice. It could be you point to me and I point to my own house. That's the one I like best. That's a cycle with just me in it. It could be you point to me and I point back to you. That's a cycle with 2 people in it. It could be you point to me and I point to Sanjay and he points back to me. So that's a cycle with 2 people in it that doesn't include the person who began the chain. And it could be that we have some big cycle that you know, there are 10 people in it. But eventually a cycle forms, and Gale's algorithm, the top trading cycle algorithm, was when a cycle forms, give everyone the house they're pointing to, they leave the market, and then you start over and say to people, point to the house you like best among those that remain. And one of the theorems that Shapley and Scarf proved is that this allocation that you get when you do that is in the core of the game. It's in the set of outcomes that no coalition of agents could, by trading among themselves, do better. And that's simple enough that I can prove it verbally to you right now. Supposing you were trying to form a coalition of people who would all prefer the houses that they got by trading among themselves to the ones that they got through the top trading cycle algorithm. Well, who could you recruit to this coalition? It wouldn't be anyone in the first cycle that formed, because they all got their very best house. They were pointing to their very favorite house and they all got it. So maybe people in the second cycle you could recruit to get something better. Well, the only way they could get something better, since they got the very best house that remained after the people in the first cycle had left, the only way they could form a coalition that would give them something better than they had gotten would be to recruit a member of the first cycle. And those people we already saw, they can't be recruited. They can't do any better. So you can't get anyone from the second cycle. And by induction, you can't form any such coalition. So this is a good kind of coalition. And when preferences are strict, it has some special properties. But if you wanted to think about using a method like that to organize a clearinghouse, you would have to be able to find out people's preferences for houses. And the only way you could easily find out would be to ask them. But when you ask people for their preferences, they want to know what you're going to do with the preferences, and then they can think about what they should tell you, which might not always be the same as their true preferences. But it turns out in this top trading cycle method, it's a dominant strategy for every agent to state his true preferences. So when we get to kidneys, and we're going to get to kidneys very fast, and you can see how that's going to happen, because every agent is going to be a patient-donor pair, and we're going to ask them in some way or another which kidneys are good for you. Can we expect to get truthful reports? So let me give you a sketch of the proof. And the issue is, let's look at this Mr. I, who has pointed to a house or to a kidney that he's not going to get. How do we know he's not going to get it? Because it's part of a cycle that doesn't include him. So what's going to happen is the cycles are going to disappear, and he's going to be left pointing out into space. And we're going to say to him, well, now tell us which is your favorite kidney of those that remain. And the question is, has he been harmed by the fact that he told us the truth about his preferences, or could he have done better by pointing somewhere else? Well, let's look what he could have done, what he could have gotten right away if he hadn't told us the truth and hadn't pointed to his favorite kidney. He could have pointed to the one right behind him in either of these directions, or to the one connected by a short chain. And if he had pointed to either of them, he would have gotten that kidney right away in a cycle. But notice that those kidneys can't leave the market before Mr. I does, because they're always ending up pointing to him. So they're not going to form a cycle until he's part of a cycle. So his opportunity set never gets smaller. So he doesn't come to harm. The kidneys he could have gotten, he can still get later in the algorithm. And these other people who are now pointing into space also have to point somewhere. And if they point to some place that connects them to him, then they will also be available to him. So his opportunity set only grows, and he doesn't lose by pointing to a kidney that he won't get. Okay, so these started to form the building blocks of our first efforts to organize kidney exchange on a large scale. And there were other building blocks. I worked together with Typhoon Sunmez and Utku Unver in those early days, and we proposed methods of top trading cycles and chains, things that looked like that diagram that I showed you. But it turns out we wrote a paper, this paper called Kidney Exchange, and we sent it to all the kidney surgeons we could think of. And only one of them answered us, and that was Frank Delmonico, who was my colleague at Harvard at the time and the head of the New England Organ Bank. And we helped him form the first interhospital exchange, the New England Program for Kidney Exchange. But one of the first things our surgical colleagues told us is, they said, that's cute, that algorithm with top trading cycles, but forget it. We can't do long cycles. They're just logistically impossible. So why are they impossible? Why were they impossible in the early part of this century? Well, it turns out that you can't give valuable consideration for a kidney. One of the things that means is you can't write a contract for a kidney that says, we'll give you a kidney today and you give us a kidney tomorrow. Consideration is contract language. You do something in return for something else. And that's an unenforceable contract. So we worried that if we were exchanging kidneys in a simple two-pair exchange, that that the chain might get broken. If we were going to do one part of it today, one transplant today, and one transplant tomorrow, it would be broken. So we did these simultaneously out of that worry. So what does simultaneously mean? So here's a picture in Cincinnati, Ohio in 2006, when kidney exchange had already become pretty well established. I mean, we were doing a bunch of them, and I'm the man in the yellow gown, keeping my hands out of the way so no one hands me anything. And in that bucket on the left is a kidney, and the kidney has come from a nephrectomy from an immediately adjacent operating room. You can't see it in the picture, but it's behind me in this first picture. And it's going into this gentleman who is in Cincinnati. But before the operation really got irrevocably underway, that is, after the donor and the transplant recipient had both been anesthetized and initial incisions had been made, Steve Woodall, this surgeon in the tiger skin cap, got on his cell phone from the operating room, and he called up Mike Reese in Toledo, Ohio, pretty nearby, and he said, "Are you ready?" And in Mike's operating room was the other donor and the other patient. That is, the donors had traveled between the two hospitals so that they could be right there when the kidney was taken out and transplanted. And only when Mike said, "Yes, we're ready, we successfully anesthetized the patients and made the initial incisions," only then was the kidney taken out. And that's a way of making sure that both parts of the transaction go through without any complications that could occur if there were a delay. But what that means is, to do that simple exchange, it was logistically difficult. You needed 4 operating rooms available simultaneously, 4 surgical teams available simultaneously for 2 nephrectomies, kidney removals, and 2 transplants. So even the simplest exchange required a lot of coordination. And what our colleagues said to us is, look, when you do top trading cycles, you might get an exchange between 10 couples. There was no limit on the length of the cycles, and 10 pairs would require 20 operating rooms. Forget it. We're never going to do that. So let's say so we started one thing that to scale up to national scale, to do lots of transplants, we knew we were going to have to do something differently. And one thing that we've done differently is make good use of the available non-directed donors. So remember, I told you about these altruistic donors. These are people who decided to give a kidney to someone without having a particular someone in mind. And what we used to do, once the profession had gotten over the difficulty of accepting such things, and you have to go through a long process to qualify as a non-directed donor. You have to not just be physiologically very healthy. You go through lots of mental health tests as well to understand your motivation and that you'll be okay afterward, even if something goes wrong with the transplant, things like that. But what we used to do once a donor had qualified is we'd say, great, you can save someone's life who's been waiting for a long time for a deceased donor kidney. And now we can say to them, you could initiate a chain. You could initiate several life-saving transplants. You could give to someone who's been waiting a long time for an exchange, and their donor would pass it forward to someone else, and their donor would give to someone on the wait list. So instead of 1 transplant, you could cause 3 to happen. And we started to do those. And here's a picture that I think appeared in the Boston Globe of just such a chain. The donor and the 2 pairs and the person on the waiting list for deceased donation who didn't have a living donor. And that's a great thing too. But one question you can ask is, how come there are only 6 people in the chain? Why are we still limiting the number? And the answer is, we were still very nervous about a link being broken. And so we did all of these simultaneously. And to have 6 people in the picture, you have to do 3 transplants and 3 nephrectomies. And we got from being able to have 4 operating rooms simultaneously to have 6 simultaneously. In New England, where we did this, there were actually 14 transplant centers. So distributing these among transplant centers didn't overload any of them. But still, if you can only do 6 at a time, you're going to have trouble meeting the enormous need. And so we started to think about non-simultaneous chains. And why can we think about non-simultaneous chains? Well, remember why we do conventional cycles simultaneously. We're worried that there'll be a broken link, that on day one, donor two will give to recipient one, and on day two, for whatever reason, donor one will fail to give to recipient two. And if that happens, and this is why we still never do these non-simultaneously, if that happens, pair two is really harmed. They're harmed in two ways, one more subtle than the other. The obvious way they're harmed is they had a surgery, a serious operation, a safe one, but major surgery that didn't do them any benefit. They gave a kidney and they didn't give one. They didn't get one back. But more seriously, or more long-term consequence is they can no longer take part in kidney exchange. They no longer have a kidney to exchange. They've given away their kidney and not gotten one in return. So if we ever did one of these non-simultaneously and the link was broken, pair two would be quite harmed. And that's why we do them simultaneously and why we need 4 operating rooms for even that small cycle. But now let's consider a non-directed donor. We can organize a chain so that every pair gets a kidney before they give one. Okay, so there's an issue there. We have to worry about broken links. But if there is a broken link, that'll be very disappointing, but it won't grievously harm pair two. They will be no worse off than they were before the non-directed donor appeared. They're disappointed not to get the kidney on schedule, but they still have their kidney. So the next time we run a kidney exchange, they'll be in it. Okay, so the cost of a broken link is much less when you start a chain with a non-directed donor and organize it so that every pair gets a kidney before they give one. Okay, and so we started to think about those, and they've caught on. Mike Reese, the surgeon who was in Toledo, Ohio, is the one who took the lead on actually performing the first non-simultaneous extended altruistic donor chain. And his co-authors here include economists and computer scientists and lots of surgeons, because it's a long chain. And here's the chain. Here's the picture that appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine, and here's the picture that appeared in People magazine, where the people participating in the chain allowed us, revealed their identities, so they stepped outside the privacy protections of the HIPAA laws to allow themselves to be written about. And what you see is the last person in the chain, whose name is Helena McKinney. That's not in the New England Journal of Medicine, of course. She's blood type AB. Turns out blood type AB is hard to match in kidney exchange, partly because it's rare. Only about 4% of Americans have blood type AB, and partly because it's relatively easier for blood type AB patients to be compatible with their donors, because they're never blood type incompatible. And so the AB patients who can't receive kidneys from their donors are very hard to match for other reasons. So these days we wouldn't end a chain with a blood type AB donor. If we reach the end of the chain here, we would say to the AB donor, why don't you give a kidney to someone on the deceased donor waiting list? And there are so many of those people that 4% blood type AB is not a problem. You can always find someone who can use the AB kidney, but not in exchange. But anyway, she was game, waited 3 years, and added another 12 people to the picture. So it turns out people are a whole lot nicer than many economic models give us credit for. And her mom had gotten a kidney, and she was game. 3 years later, she gave a kidney, and the chain extended for quite a while. So we've had a lot of success with chains. They didn't immediately catch on. Here we go. Itai Ashlagi played a big role in helping them become a standard part of American transplantation. But today, somewhere around half of the kidney exchange transplants happen through chains, because chains do a lot more transplants. We have broken links about 2% of the time, and the average chain has 10 people in the picture. So chains have proved to be a very successful part of American kidney exchange. Non-simultaneous chains, which breaks the logistical barrier, and took lots of argumentation and persuasion and experience to learn how to do properly. but they're a big part of contemporary exchange today. And there have been some long chains. I mean, again, as I say, the average one has 10 people in the picture, 5 transplants and 5 donations. But here's one that in 2012 was the longest to date. It's no longer the longest. This is a picture from the New York Times. So they can be long. And organizing long chains efficiently, finding the right long chains. There's lots of multiplicity in chains. There's not much multiplicity in cycles, right? A cycle determines itself. When the cycle closes, that's your cycle. But chains, there are many different chains you could have, and finding one that maximizes some weighted sum of the transplants to get a good mix of quality and quantity is an integer programming problem. It's an NP complete integer programming problem. So as far as we know from raw computational complexity theory, it could be impossible to solve. But in fact, they're not impossible to solve. There are hard instances. They're not always easy to solve, but we've always been able to solve for every data set that we've done using clever, operations research kinds of heuristics. So there's certainly plenty of theory that could be done here that might be able to explain more satisfactorily why we're always able to find a solution. Or it could just be that the really, really hard cases are very rare, but we don't know the answer to that. So let me tell you just a moment, just a tiny bit more about compatibility. I've already indicated that blood type is very powerful. And basically the story about blood type is there are 2 blood components that we call A and B. And your blood type is which of those do you have? And you can have neither or both, as well as each one. As a result, there are 4 blood types. And the one where you have neither A nor B, in American English, we call blood type O. But in many languages, that's called blood type 0 or null, meaning you don't have any of them. And that helps explain the blood type compatibility. The rule is you can't take a kidney from someone who has one of these blood components that you do not have. That's why AB patients can take a kidney from anyone, but blood type O patients have to get a kidney from a blood type O donor. But that's not the only reason patients are incompatible with their donors. If it were, we'd never see any O donors. We'd never see any O donors because they're always blood type compatible with their patient. But you can be, you can have what's called a positive cross match. You have 6 proteins called human leukocyte antigens that your immune system looks out for to identify foreign bodies, that they somehow identify that they're in a cell. And if you have an antibody to one of my proteins, then you can't easily take my kidney because your immune system will attack it, much the way we're expecting coronavirus to give us antibodies to coronavirus so that when it shows up, your antibodies will attack it. Well, it's not good if your antibodies attack a kidney you've been given. So one important reason for kidney exchange is that lots of people can't take the kidney they've been offered because their immune system will reject it. And how subject you are to this problem has to do with how many antibodies you have. So in kidney exchange, we have a lot of people who have very few antibodies. Their percent reactive antibodies is near 0. That is, they're healthy people, except their kidneys failed. And we have a lot of people who have a lot of antibodies. And that has to do with kidney disease and also a lot of other things. It turns out my wife and I, if I didn't know my blood type, the chance that one of you could take my kidneys, just the statistical chance is somewhat over 50%. But the chance that my wife can take my kidney is only about 30%. And that's because my wife and I are parents. And in the course of childbirth, her immune system might have been exposed to some of the proteins that our boys inherit from me. You get half your proteins from your mom and half from your dad. And so she might have antibodies to those proteins, in which case, if my kidney showed up, she wouldn't be able to take it. But people with this very high PRA, they've been sick, they've gotten blood transfusions, maybe they've had a previous transplant that's been rejected. And so they can have very high PRAs. And here, in fact, is just the people with 95 to 100% PRAs. That is, the chance that they would reject a compatible blood type compatible kidney is from 95 to 100%. In fact, they are really in the 99 to 100%. They're very hard to find kidneys. And, that's true in that's true around the country. And as a result, because of that, chains play the very important role that they play. So let me explain that. Okay, why do we need long chains? Well, hospitals are players. There's a couple of things. One is there are a lot of people with a lot of antibodies, and they're hard to match. But we get those patients selected into inter-hospital kidney exchange because there are now a lot of hospitals that can do kidney exchange. It's a standard part of American transplantation. And there's a tendency for many logistical and some financial reasons for them to try to do exchanges internally just among their patients. And of course, that selects out some of the easy to match pairs, because you can do them internally pairs if they're easy to match. But if they're hard to match, you need a big pool of candidates. So here's a picture of a compatibility graph, a snapshot from a moment in time of pairs. So the way to read this picture, the way to see it, is each circle is a patient-donor pair. And in this particular data set, every patient and every donor has blood type A. So there's no blood type incompatibility. Everyone in this picture happens to have blood type A. I picked the picture for that reason. And an arrow goes from one pair to another if the kidney from the donor in the first pair is compatible with the patient in the second pair. And what you see is there are these blue pairs who have lots of arrows going in. They're the unsensitized pairs. They are easy to find a match for. But most of the pairs are very hard to find a match for. There aren't going to be cycles that involve these pairs that are in the very sparse part of the graph. So what can we do? Well, imagine we're in a big room full of these very hard to match pairs. What's the chance that my pair, the donor in my pair, can give a kidney to the patient in your pair? Well, it's very small because they all have very, very high PRA. But if it's a big room, the chance that we can give a kidney to someone isn't so small. And how about what's the chance they can give a kidney back to us? Well, it's very small, but the chance they can give a kidney to someone else, that's not so small. And this is how chains form. The chance that the next pair can give a kidney to someone is not small. And it's just going to take a really long time to come back in a cycle. And we can't do very large cycles. But if we have a non-directed donor, we might be able to do a very large chain. And that's what's happened over the years. So we're doing more and more exchanges in the United States. Again, this is through 2019. And when you count the pairs in the exchange and the non-directed donors, we're doing about 15% of the living donor kidney transplants in the United States. So that's great in a way, but it doesn't solve the problem. And the problem isn't just in the United States. So it turns out kidney disease is global, and millions of people die every year, often because of financial problems. That is, there are places in the world where they can do effective surgeries, but where the national health insurance doesn't cover them, for instance. So I want to tell you now about the possibility of expanding kidney exchange beyond national borders in ways that would be mutually beneficial. Because remember, it's good for kidney patients to have a big pool of possible donors, and for donors to have a big pool of possible recipients. That's how you form these long chains. Okay, so here's a map of the world. That's not a map. Here's a picture that shows in orange deceased donation per million population, and in blue living donation per million population. And in the right-hand side, there are countries like the US, wealthy countries with well-developed health systems, and lots of transplantation. And down on the left, there are places where they can do transplants. So I'm looking here at the Philippines and Mexico, but where it's hard for them to organize them on a large scale. And in the middle there, I'm going to tell you a quick story about Denmark, where they have an excellent health system and they have excellent public health insurance, but it doesn't cover transplants for people outside of Denmark. That is, you can't go outside of Denmark and get a transplant and be paid by the Danish health insurance. And Denmark doesn't have kidney exchange. So if you're a highly sensitized person in Denmark, I'll tell you briefly about a few Danish patients we've included in chains who have to come to the United States. But if we're going to do this, we're going to have to do not only the medical and social kind of engineering, we're going to have to do some financial engineering, because whenever you cross borders, it turns out there are some financial hitches, right? We don't in the US, we don't even coordinate our kidney exchange with Canada, which also has excellent kidney exchange. So an early part of this talk I've been in Canada explaining and exhorting, and everyone agrees, it'd be a good idea to coordinate, but it's hard to do. But it's not just a North American problem. So let me tell you a little about that. We can start thinking about inviting people into American kidney exchange who are patient donor pairs, but who can't get a transplant at home, but are from a country where they could go back and be properly cared for, and maybe even where chains could start. That is, there are excellent hospitals. There just isn't the public resources needed to finance kidney exchange. Incidentally, in the United States, kidney disease is financed in a unique manner. Everyone who has kidney failure is eligible for Medicare, right, regardless of their age or disability status. So it's the only disease that has that property. So here's a pair from the Philippines. In the Philippines, kidney disease is a death sentence, but they came to the US. They got a kidney from an American non-directed donor. Here's Jose, here's Christine. She's a blood type O donor that helped start a chain. They went home, and at 5 years post-surgery, they were still doing well. That's sort of the idea. And the idea about the finances is we can actually pay for that in the US out of the savings that the American healthcare system gets when an American is transplanted. Because roughly speaking, a year of dialysis costs about as much as a transplant. But after a year of dialysis, you have to do another year of dialysis. And after a transplant, you're pretty much better. You need immunosuppressive drugs, but the cost drops terribly. So every time we can transplant a hard to transplant American, we can afford to give away some kidney care. So it's self-financing. I'm rushing a little now because I'm nearing the end. But this is true everywhere in the world. Surgery is more expensive than dialysis because some people stay on dialysis a long. I'm sorry. This is actually just backwards. The waiting times make average dialysis more expensive than surgery. I'll have to fix this slide. And the reason is once you get surgery, you don't need dialysis anymore. So you measure the savings in months of dialysis saved. Okay, so global kidney exchange, which is what we're calling this, is pretty special when you talk about international healthcare, because often when we talk about international healthcare, we're talking about foreign aid, sending money. USAID sends money to help control infectious diseases in far places. But this is about mutual aid, right? This is, if we could make kidney exchange global, we could save a lot more people, and we could finance it out of the dialysis savings to the health systems of wealthy countries. But it's not without controversy. So here's a paper that Mike Reese and a bunch of other people, I'm in there, published in the American Journal of Transplantation about global kidney exchange, called Kidney Exchange to Overcome Financial Barriers to Kidney Transplantation. And it was published in the American Journal of Transplantation, but it was accompanied in the same issue by an editorial that said, is this blazing a trail or is it walking a tightrope? It sort of said, this is full of difficulties that might bring it down, ethical difficulties. Some people have been, there's been some substantial opposition, some of it much more personal. Here's the director of the Spanish National Organ Transplant Center, who says the Spanish National Organ Transplant Center is preventing the entry into Europe of a new form of organ trafficking proposed by a Nobel Prize winner in economics. So, so the opposition is fierce. It's a little interesting, but there's also been lots of support. And so the American Society of Transplant Surgeons has supported it. Parts of the Italy of Italian surgical world have supported it and asked the World Health Organization to support it. More recently, the European Society of Transplantation has come out in support. And as I already mentioned, we're working with Danish private organizations to help bring Danish kidney patients to the US while waiting for the Danish healthcare system to step up and play its role. So I'm pretty optimistic about this. And one reason I'm optimistic about it is we're getting support in the places where this is needed, the overseas places where it's needed. Here's a picture of a chain that includes a Mexican couple, and it was featured on the cover of Newsweek on Espanol, the news magazine that speaks Spanish. And this was in 2017. The first paragraph, roughly translated, says, just as US President Donald Trump is seeking to build a wall of thousands of miles on the border with Mexico, a tireless surgeon and an economist joined forces to exchange organs between both countries. So we think this is going to work because it really helps a lot of people, and we can afford to do it. We can do the financial engineering, but it remains to be seen. And when you survey people on this, what you find is even in places where kidney exchange is illegal, I'm sorry, like Germany, support for global kidney exchange is very high. It would win referenda, also in Spain. That's where that organ trafficking news story came from. It's quite high. So we're encouraged that this will get support even in places where it doesn't now have support. Okay, so let me end by saying controversies have to be taken seriously. In other words, we started with early transplantation, and we were nervous about living donors, and then we were nervous about unrelated living donors, and now we're nervous properly about international exchange and the various things that might go wrong across borders, including in some parts of the world where there are nasty black markets, run by criminals. So lots of precautions would have to be taken. And we think that proceeding carefully and slowly and monitoring, as we go, has a lot of promise. There is good surgery around the world. I was in Ahmedabad recently, and I sat in on a robot surgery, and the surgeon is sitting here. He's not in the, I came into the room, and the shocking thing was he got up and shook my hand, and he wasn't wearing gloves, and I wasn't wearing gloves, and we weren't in the sterile field. The patient is, a couple of yards to the right, being tended by people who've taken full sterility precautions. But what he's doing is looking at a highly magnified three-dimensional version that allows him to do surgeries at a distance. It's only a short distance here. He's in the operating room, but he could be at a larger distance too. He could be connected by very reliable internet and do that surgery in a different hospital. So the chance that we can expand kidney exchange in ways that we don't yet imagine is large. And let me just end by saying that we've done lots of innovations related to kidney exchange. We now use non-directed donors to start chains instead of just donating to the deceased donor waiting list. We've got non-simultaneous chains. We're starting to have some chains that are initiated by a non-directed donor who is dead, right? Right now, all the deceased donors' kidneys just produce one transplant, but if you can start initiating chains, they can produce more. And we're starting to overcome financial and other barriers for international exchange. So I'm optimistic, but it's a long, hard fight, worth fighting, and you're all invited. Here's the final paragraph of the paper that I'm using as my source material, the paper with Itai Ashlagi that's coming out in Management Science, and it says that there's room for kidney exchange to continue to grow by doing all these things we've talked about, and some we haven't thought of yet. And you're all invited. This is something that, not just kidney exchange, but this is certainly one where the kind of expertise that we bring in Informs to thinking about healthcare is very valuable. And it's sometimes rewarding and sometimes frustrating, but this is something where analytics, as well as politics and persuasion, can play a big role. And I'll stop there.
Really thank Al for this wonderful, insightful and also extremely provocative and valuable talk. This is somebody who's really shown his commitment, not just to do the initial theory, but taking it all the way towards making a difference, not just nationally, but internationally. Al, I have a question for you. This is a question from Hanan Al-Awadi. And Hanan is asking, how could global kidney exchange limit organ trafficking, especially in conflict-affected areas?
So global kidney exchange is not ready to start in every area. So conflict-affected areas are probably not the safest places to send patients back home to. And so I would imagine that's not where we're going to start. When we were in the very early stages of just thinking about this, I went to Lagos in Nigeria, and I spoke to a minister of health, and they're also not ready yet. They need much more basic help. It wouldn't be a good place to go to be a transplant patient. They don't do transplants in Nigeria. They have much more fundamental problems. But in the Philippines, they do transplants. In Mexico, they do transplants, and they actually have excellent health insurance too, but they don't have kidney exchange, and their health insurance doesn't cover you in American kidney exchange. So we're mostly talking about places where we can partner with established transplant centers where the doctors often were trained in the United States, and we hope with health services, and so many of the problems that we have to worry about with global kidney exchange, with international kidney exchange, we can't completely ignore with American kidney exchange either. In other words, when a pair shows up, especially when they're not related, the question is, are you giving me a kidney because you love me, or have I paid you for your kidney, or worse yet, has my criminal organization threatened your family or something? So there's lots of interviewing that goes on. Someone who wants to donate a kidney is immediately gets their own team, and it takes often many months. Someone, a lady named Marcia Gershon, who gave a kidney, just wrote a book called Kidney to Share, in which she more or less, well, she describes the difficulties of becoming a donor, and some of them, sensibly, she thinks could be made easier. It shouldn't be so hard to be a donor, but a lot of those difficulties have to do with separating the willing donors who are legitimate donors from others. So of course we're going to have to think about that globally. We're going to have to think about it. We continue to have to think about it in the United States. But there's kidney transplantation in all these places, so they have ways of thinking about it, and we'll have to partner with them and make sure we do things that are legal in both countries.
Thank you. So I have a follow-up question myself that's kind of around the same issue. Early on in the presentation, you mentioned Iran be the only country where exchange of money is legal in terms of donation. The question is, I mean, of course, the current political environment is not in place, but let's say a location where it's legal, there's a person who originates from there and comes to United States, or originates a chain with another country where they can actually get the transplant sort of paired and exchanged, which keeps that process legal, if you like. How would that be taught? Now going back to NOTA and the ethics, but at the same time, looking at the benefits.
I don't know how exchange with Iran might work. My understanding is we don't have great intergovernmental working relationships with Iran right now. The Iranian law is nuanced. I couldn't go to Iran and buy a kidney. The Iranian law says that the kidney donor and the kidney recipient have to have the same citizenship. So it's almost all Iranians donating to Iranians, but there's a small Afghan market that operates in Iran also. But and I guess I could go to Iran with an American donor and pay for a kidney. But the payments are regulated, and because there's a lot of inflation in Iran, they're not very large. So I don't think Iran is doing any international transplantation, but I'm not aware.
So I guess this is more like a comment by two individuals, Shikui Wu and then also Robert Hill. So let me just read the comments and maybe there's a question there. So Shikui is asking, with the technologies, for example, organ storage advancements, so cold times potentially increase significantly. The critical factor with respect to timing in such exchanges may be significantly relaxed. Then the chain can be longer. So that's, I guess, the comment. So for example, kidney probably be okay for 24 hours and can be, in that time, can be shipped around the globe.
Yes. So we ship kidneys by air in the United States.
Right.
So most of those chains now, that are done non-simultaneously have shipments for the, for the parts of the chain that are done in close timing to each other. But every now and then there's what we call a bridge donor who waits for a while because we haven't found a good recipient form, a good extension of the chain. So that's a different kind of non-simultaneity. But yes, we ship kidneys by air, and operating room schedules have in some cases been redesigned to reflect when airplanes are landing.
True. Thank you. So Robert Hill, let me ask his question. It seems that there are some interesting criticality tipping point phenomenon. Here, a single non-directed donor can set off a chain of 60 exchanges or more versus a single exchange in a queue waiting list model, I guess, an informed step model. Does this have larger lessons for understanding the effects of altruism in other fields? Are there kidney exchange like training mechanisms in existence in the real world in other fields?
Well, so I think it does have a big effect of how we think about altruism. There aren't a lot of other medical kinds of exchanges like this because you can't do heart exchange because you only have one heart, right? Kidney exchange depends on the fact that people have a spare. But in terms of how we think about altruism and commitment and promises, I think behavioral economics is taking lots of recognition of the fact that people are sometimes behave in more socially productive ways than selfish models would allow. So it's easy to make a model in which you can't have non-simultaneous exchange because as soon as someone's sister gets a kidney, they no longer are interested in giving a kidney of their own. But that turns out not to be the case. And partly it's because people are nice and because a deal's a deal. Partly it's a case because we don't take just anyone to be a bridge donor. The nurses have to like you a lot for you to be nominated to someone who will, wait a week and then give a kidney. The nurses have to think you're the kind of person who will do that. And of course, you get to know the nursing team and the surgical team. Donating a kidney is not an easy thing to arrange. But also, I think when you think about how families work, imagine you go home for Thanksgiving and your sister announces to the family that she's ill and is going to need a kidney transplant. And because you love your sister, you volunteer to be a donor. And although it turns out you're incompatible, you can go in with kidney exchange to her and give a kidney so that she gets a kidney. Well, every Thanksgiving afterward, that's going to be a story told by your family. But suppose after she got a kidney, you didn't give a kidney. Well, then it would be a very different story. And so I think that economic models are becoming richer and taking into account that there's lots of socially positive action that people take for reasons that might be pure altruism and reasons that it might have to do with social norms and things like that. And one of the big changes in economics in my professional lifetime has been that we don't insist that everyone be relentlessly maximizing something simple. They could be maximizing something more complex, like the chance that your family will be really glad to see you in Thanksgiving when they tell the story.
Thank you. This is wonderful reply back. Altruism is obviously the center of many, many, many things in life. I guess we are at the end of the time. Are there any remaining questions that somebody has? We just have a minute or two to get them answered.
We have one in the Q&A, Sanjay.
Let me try. What? I guess as for somebody who's anonymous right now, just again asking something similar to what was asked before. Could there be other applications of this idea, perhaps outside of healthcare?
Well, chains are, let me put it another way. Money is a great market design invention for decentralizing exchanges, right? The reason I started to think about kidney exchange years ago is because when I would tell my students about the Shapley and Scarf papers about houses, they would say to me, "But professor, you do know we use money to buy houses, and we don't have to find long chains of exchange." So that's one reason why we don't do long chains. But on the other hand, if you look at real estate markets, so real markets for houses, if the market is very hot, if it's really easy to sell houses and therefore hard to buy one quickly, sometimes people hesitate to sell their house before they have already bought a house. They know where they're going to live. And if the market is very cold, if it's very hard to sell a house, then sometimes people make offers on houses that are contingent on them being able to sell their own house. So that's the formation of chains, right? I can buy your house only if I can sell my house, things like that. So I think we see chains in the world in various ways. There's, and not just among people, there's a lovely video put out by, I think, the BBC of hermit crabs, which as they grow bigger have to get a bigger shell, so you can, but a too big a shell doesn't work. So apparently you can see hermit crabs lining up behind big shells. I found a shell, but it's too big for me. I'm a hermit crab, but I wait until a bigger hermit crab comes and takes the bigger shell, and then I can take his shell. So I think as we start to look for chains, we'll see them in more places, and we'll be able to design them in more designs. But don't forget that money is a great way to decentralize exchange. When I moved from Boston to California, I didn't exchange my house as part of a chain. I sold my house in Boston. I got money for it. I came to California and together with much more money was able to buy a new house.
Thank you, Al. I think this does bring us to the end of the event, and I'm sure there are questions by those who may still be listening. They can send those questions to me and be able to forward those to Al and have him maybe get those questions answered, or maybe put him in communication with some of you who are interested in the topic. I mean, if you were face-to-face, we'll probably clap aloud, but for now, thank you so much, Al.
Oh, thank you.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you.